Happy Gay Pride Month for 2022. Cheers to you. Cheers to the month. I'm gay. I've been gay my whole life. Nobody made me gay by molesting me or raping me. I was molested and raped, but that's because I was vulnerable when I was a youth. Two separate occasions. But that's not why I was gay. I was always gay. I know a lot of you are getting pissed off at us about this being Gay Pride Month. I saw this Pridemonth, and you have this drag queen and drag queen story hour with the horns looking like a demon, and oh, here's Balaam or whatever the hell the demon is with the goat and with male female genitalia. The only thing I can tell you is the same thing that I tell Trump haters, people with Trump derangement syndrome. Don't be their toy. They're doing that on purpose. Nobody asked us if we wanted a Gay Pride Month. It's just something that popped up. And I remember when I first heard it, I was like, a whole month? Isn't that crazy? Gay Pride Day is fine, but I don't need a whole month. So really, that's it. I'm proud of being gay like I'm proud of being Italian. And I didn't do videos anymore, so I have to do this. Now, what's going on here is this, is the United States is no longer a constitutional republic. We have a regime ruling everything. There's a guy on Facebook and on YouTube, Ramsey Paul, who says that he described it as a left-wing fascist state. And I think that's just about right. It's fascist because you don't know where the government ends and the corporations begin, and the corporations end and the government begins. You have these people in control, who are put in positions of authority, but they're obviously not really running things. It doesn't do any good to talk about the liberals because the Republicans are doing today what they were doing, what the Democrats were doing to me back in 2003 when I was marching in the streets against the Iraq War. Oh, I'm so helpless. I can't do anything about this. Oh, I'm Donald Trump. I'm so helpless. I can't do anything. Of course you could. You could shut all this stuff down if you want. So it's a left-wing fascism that we're under. And they've been abusing our kids for a couple of years now. We got this thing going on with the healthcare crisis, and you're worrying that, which is cutting off their ability to socialize, cutting off brain development. Saw one study of infants and toddlers. I think the IQ's dropped about 20 points. This thing going on here. This is just a new phase in the child abuse that they've been doing. Human sacrifice, really, because these people are Satanists. But now this is a new phase, and now we have a face to this. I, William Robert Krapik III, I'm abusing your children. I'm sneaking behind your back, and I'm raping your kids. That's what they're telling you. Don't be their toy. Now, both sides, there's a war going on between LGBTQ Inc., Globohomo, whatever, and on the other, family values Christianity. And you both like to use this autonomic, reflexive connection between being a homosexual and being a man who molests boys. There's even the term homosexual molestation to confuse the issue on purpose. Because, honey, I got news for you. I am a homosexual. I am a gay man. If you talk to gay men who are comfortable with being gay, we're no more or no less likely to molest boys than heterosexuals are to molest girls. The study I saw, they have these little things, they can put it around your boy bits and see if you're aroused. They put you in situations where video and audio, where you're with a gay guy would be with a boy and a straight man would be with a girl. We're no more, no less likely to be aroused by children, by minors. We have children, and the other one is children being put into a hospital emergency room because they were raped or molested. If we can identify the perp, homosexual men, we're about 2% of the population. We made up about 1% of the perps. So according to that, we're actually less likely to molest than other people, but I would say that's just the sample. Well within error. No more, no less likely to molest children. But that issue is purposely confused. When you talk about sexual abuse of minors and you talk about us homosexuals, you're very careful to not split off the bisexuals. You throw us in with the bisexuals. We're completely different species. Of course, we're not lesbians, but we're not bisexuals either. There's a man who did a study of bisexuals. He drew a sample from the gay community. And all of these were gay people who just were saying that they were bisexuals. So he wrote a paper, there are no bisexuals, it's a myth. And then bisexuals were saying, of course we're real. And then he drew another sample from swingers clubs and stuff like that. And then there you go, there are the bisexuals. That's how different we are. I don't want to hear about gay parents, how bad we are when you have intact heterosexual families compared to families headed by gay men who were in the closet. And the family fell apart. And then, of course, there's the stigma of being gay, especially if they went to church. But the reality is, Globohomo would be impossible. None of this would be possible if you family values people had not been lying about the Bible and lying about homosexuality. And you're all doing it. The Protestants, the Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox, the Jews, you're all doing it. I've been proving that on my previous videos, that you're lying about the Bible. I'm looking at this stuff in the Hebrew and the Greek, I'm like, this stuff is not about homosexuality. There are some exceptions. We're going to talk about a big one here. So, as a matter of due diligence, and I think a prompting of the Holy Spirit, I'm going to release 2 videos. One proving, this one, that God is in favor of gay marriage, and the other showing that Sodom and Gomorrah is not about homosexuality, it's about UFOs. I've been carefully monitoring this stuff on UFOs. There's nothing that I hear in the news and on the internet that's not in here. It's all there. Just like on homosexuality, you need to learn how to read it. You need to learn how to read a book. Now, normally when you have discussions of homosexuality in the Bible, obviously we're going to talk about Romans chapter 1, which I will start out reading, but we're also going to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. This is so important, it's so critical that you understand what's going on with these UFOs, that this is going to be split off into a completely separate video. By the way, if you're one of these family values people who've been lying about the Bible, that's your fault. You screwed that up. People need to understand what's going on, and you screwed that up. Sodom and Gomorrah is part of a whole network of stories that are all tied in together very, very tightly. These are my notes. I have my notes here. These are my notes for that. It's just nothing but passages from the Bible, and that's not even all of them I can bring up. For those of you who like fag bashing and like laughing about AIDS, AIDS was funny, right? Really hilarious. And talking about Globohomo and how I, William Robert Krepik III, am part of the Globohomo agenda, Globohomo doesn't give a rat's ass about gay men. The proof of that is AIDS. Everything you just saw, they did to us gay men back in the 1980s, and Globohomo never stood up for me. Globohomo was part of the problem. This is over in my modern history and science section. The real Anthony Fauci. Guess who was involved in both of these? You know how today William Robert Krepik III can get on the internet and look things up? When I was coming out of college in high school back in 1980s, mid-1980s, I'm 56 years old. Oh, I'm going to go down into my gay and lesbian section. This guy named John Lauritsen, who's a gay reporter for the New York Blade, a gay newspaper. Everything that this guy says here about Anthony Fauci, it's the same thing. If you took care of your health, you didn't have a problem. If you took care of your health, you didn't have a problem. You have people dying of the health scare and they don't have the virus. They have the virus and they're not dying. Same thing. And they just arranged everything to look as bad as it can. Had a lot of us take a poison called AZT that killed about 300,000 of us, more than 300,000 of us. Stop me when I get to the part that you find to be hilarious. You had people who didn't take care of themselves, who'd abused their body because they were addicts. We're going to talk about why we had such problems back in the 1970s. We weren't liberated. It wasn't gay liberation. We jumped from one frying pan into another frying pan. We had a lot of addiction, problems with that. You can see a guy dying of AIDS in 1985, put him back in 1905. A doctor there would think he was at the final stages because he was a drug addict. Same thing. I'm going to send links to these videos to as many people on both sides of this argument as I can. I'm reading this off because it's important. That way, when you stand in judgment before Jesus, you cannot say that you weren't warned. And when I stand in judgment before Jesus, I'll be able to say that I tried to warn you. This is in compliance with the book of Ezekiel 33, 7 through 9, the Gospel of Matthew 18, 15 through 21. Now, we're going to start with a bang. I'm going to use the New Oxford Annotated Bible with the Apocrypha, New Revised Standard Version. We're going to hit the big guy. Romans chapter 1. Okay. Romans chapter 1. Verses 8 through 32. This seems pretty clear cut, right? Well, let's see about this. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of those who by their wickedness suppress the truth. Suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and even seen through the things he has made. So they are without excuse. For though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking. And their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. And they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling a mortal human being, or birds, or four-footed animals, or reptiles. Therefore, God gave them up in their lust of their hearts to impurity, to the degrading of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them up to degrading passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural, and in the same way also the men, giving up natural intercourse with women, were consumed with passion for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men, and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind and to things that should not be done. They were filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, covetousness, malice, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, craftiness. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, rebellious towards parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. They know God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. Yet they not only do them, but even applaud others who practice them. Pretty damning, don't you think? But I have some problems. Virtually little that I read from here is actually from the Bible. Now, Paul is a Pharisee. I've heard it said that he thinks like a rabbi. He builds arguments from Bible. He does it all the time. Where's the Bible here? And it's not here. The Bible is pro-gay and pro-gay marriage. That's another problem with this. Paul knows that. And here he seems to be contradicting it. He is not. I've known everyone's been lying about the Bible. But when did it start? I know it had to start a long time ago. Right? If the Protestants are doing it and the Catholics are doing it and the Eastern Orthodox are doing it and the Jews are doing it, then it almost certainly probably started before Christianity even started. So when Paul came along, it was already in full force. Where did the wording come from? Where did the policy come from to lie about the Bible? Because when you read the stuff in Hebrew, especially Moses, we're going to go over Moses, this is not about homosexuality. Why are you lying? Now I know. I know where all this came from. It came from Plato. By the way, if you're going to read Plato, you can get stuff online or get recopies of old translations. Just get the Plato Complete Works, edited by John M. Cooper, associate editor D.S. Hutchinson. It puts everything in context. It's a brand new, fresh translation. I mean, if you want to compare, contrast, go ahead and do the old one, but just do this one. Let's look at the wording. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made. Let me get my collection here of my Plato reading. We're going to go to the Timaeus, the dialogue of Timaeus. It's his creation account. Okay. Page 1243 in the book. Now I'm going to talk about Plato and how important he is. And my point here is that Plato just screwed up. And he shouldn't have screwed up. He really didn't have any excuse. I suspect, though, that he had some friends. I go to page 1243. All right. Now, you'll see in this book, like 40 and then B, C, D. There's an older compilation of Plato, and this was on page 40 and whatever. So, right. Things in heaven are invisible, but you can see them through the things on earth. So Timaeus is the creation account. I'm 100% convinced that sometime after Plato wrote the Republic, somebody had introduced him to Moses. You can actually read Timaeus as a commentary on the book of Genesis. Alrighty. Now this is God creating the cosmos. Prior to the coming of time, the universe had already been made to resemble in various respects the model in whose likeness the God was making it. But the resemblance still fell short, in that it didn't yet contain all the living things that were have to come to be within it. This remaining task he went on to perform, casting the world into the nature of its model. And so he determined that the living things he was making should possess the same kinds and numbers of living things as those which, according to the discernment of the intellect, are contained within the real living thing. Now there are four of these kinds. First, the heavenly race of gods. Next, the kind that has wings and travels through the air. Third, the kind that lives in water. And fourth, the kind that has feet and lives on land. So through these creations, these four-footed things that you worship instead of the real thing, you can figure out creation. That's what Paul's talking about. The Roman world was soaked in Plato. People thought in terms of Plato. Plato is the divine Plato. He is the philosopher. And you will see, although he screwed up on the homosexuality thing, I agree with that 100%. Okay? What's going on here is this love of Plato was being used to attack homosexuals. You have, the first Christians were basically all Jews. Paul is writing to the church in Rome. It's dominated by Jewish Christians. A lot of pagan Christians are starting to move in. A lot of us are homosexuals. And they're holding this against us. They're holding Plato against us. Okay? That is the context. He is speaking to these people. His argument does not stop at the end of chapter 1. It continues on into chapter 2. So now that you understand where Paul is coming from, let's move into chapter 2. So all this, they know God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, yet they not only do them, but even applaud others who practice them. Therefore, you have no excuse, whoever you are, when you judge others. For in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, are doing the very same things. When I was a young gay boy in junior high reading the Bible, this whole thing used to just make me burst out in tears. Am I going to hell or not? Because Paul seems to be contradicting himself. He's not. He set them up for a trap. Oh, you're really wonderful. Aren't you just great? You're doing the same thing that they are. And by the way, this stuff here doesn't even come from the Bible. You say, we know that God's judgment on those who do such things is in accordance with truth. Do you imagine, whoever you are, that when you judge those who do such things and yet do them yourself, you will escape the judgment of God? Or do you despise the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience? Do you not realize that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance? But by your hard and impenitent heart, you are storing up wrath for yourself on the day of wrath, when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. That's what's going on with that passage. As I said before, one of the major reasons why I knew this cannot be against homosexuality is because the Bible is pro-gay, and it's even pro-gay marriage. There's a gay wedding in the Old Testament that God loves. But we're going to step on through for Plato. We're going to talk about this gay stuff and when it came and where it could have come from, because I suspect he did not originate it. Now, before I launch my critique of Plato, I want to put Plato in proper context. I want to show you how I handle him, how I perceive him, how I orient myself towards him. And it's because he screwed up on the gay thing, but he's incredibly important. I love Plato. I know he's in heaven. I can guarantee you he's in heaven. In fact, that's the name of one of my books I'm thinking of writing. What's it called? Why Plato is in Heaven. Everyone who loves America and who's horrified by what's happening to this country and horrified by this regime, you need to read The Republic, which he wrote during his prime, and you need to read The Laws. That's the last book that he wrote. Okay? And then you need to read them again. And for my research on my book, I'm reading them through a third time and I'm making extensive notes. Okay? The enemy has read him. There's a reason why this enemy attacked music so early. They were going after music in the 1800s. There's something called Tin Pan Alley. That was a sheet music industry. They went after that. They attack you through music. Plato talks about that all the time. And let's bring me to this shirt. If you look at that monarch mind control stuff, the butterfly shows up in their symbolism, and you may thinking that I'm involved in evil. Well, let me ask you a question. Is a doctor evil? Well, it depends on what the doctor is doing. Exactly. This is a process to help you get out of, if you're locked into neurosis, it helps you get out of it. You're neurotic, caterpillar, you're released from your neurosis, you're a butterfly. But there's a stage in between that's very unstable and very scary. Okay, so I'm either going to help you build a wall around that, or your Jungian therapist. I use C.G. Jung's people, so that this stuff can, because there's going to be a collapse. There's a very dangerous phase, and then slowly the body will bump, 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 and then it'll get the rotation going again. You do that, or when you're at that critical phase, they shove you over the cliff. Humpty Dumpty, you fall down, can't put, you're all in pieces, your left hand's against your right hand. We're using the same tools. A doctor can heal, or he can torture really good. And that's what's going on here. I cannot just read the Republic, read the Laws, then read them again, and then maybe read them again and just take really detailed notes, what I'm doing now. That's part of my book. Another thing, I judge you by your standards. Whether or not you're going to heaven or hell, I don't judge that. But if I could deal with you, if I can trust you, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to judge you by your standards. What do you think? If you really love white people, and or if you really love Jesus, and or if you really love Western civilization or America, then you will listen to what I tell you. I judge you by your standards, and I will judge Plato by his. Reading Plato makes me proud to be a Christian. Flat out. He would 100% approve of the medieval Catholic Church. He'd love it. A lot of things that the Catholics did that as a Protestant I didn't understand, I'm just like, okay, I get it now. I see what you're doing. And I agree. Even on the homosexuality thing. This is one of the reasons why I didn't become a Catholic. I read the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I read it a couple of times, but it's just like, You speak with absolute authority. You're inerrant in matters of faith, and you're wrong about homosexuality, and I can't join. I'm not going to subvert the process because I understand what you're doing. I respect hierarchy. He would also approve of Mormons, who I consider Christian. They're weird, but they got there. And in many, many weird ways, obviously not the video for it, the Mormons kind of took, although you think of them as a weird Protestant cult, they brought, Mormons have moved into alignment with Catholics in many important ways. Okay? Nobody is the equal of us Christians when it comes to incarnating Plato's vision of how a society should be run. That is why we built the greatest civilization in the world. That is why we built the greatest cities in the world. I love Plato, you should too, but he screwed up here. And he has no excuse for making this mistake. Oh, here's some stuff that I left here. The extensive notes that I took from reading Plato. This right here is the Platonic solids. He is completely underestimated as a scientist. If you understand how the solids work, how the triangles work, it's going to sort of get you in the ballpark of the periodic table and thinking in terms of the periodic table. Because this is just as you have isotopes of fire and isotopes of earth. Here's the way I put it. It's like he can get us here, but he doesn't have telescopes and microscopes, which we have, can get us there. He does a lot of wonderful things. Also, a key to understanding Plato is when you go beyond the science, beyond what you know, you start having projection. And projection gets a bad name, but, excuse me, cheers to you. But really, it's a way, if you understand how projection works and how your projection works, you understand that it's like being able to see the back of your own head psychologically. And when I'm looking at somebody going beyond what they know and projecting, I can get a good idea of what person they are because I can start to read their mind. Here are two mandalas, one from the Republic. The other comes later in Timaeus, the creation account. Timaeus is a sequel to the Republic. And it tells me that this man is simply amazing. That he's simply amazing. But alas, we're going to have to get into our critique. He should know better. We're going to read the introduction to the Republic. He has a brother named Glaucon, who is gay. Glaucon is a homosexual. So let's look. Oh, no, Plato's over here. Let's read what the introduction has to say about him. And this is true, by the way. Glaucon is an ambitious, energetic, manly young man, much interested in public affairs and drawn to the life of politics. An intelligent and argumentative person, he scorns ordinary pleasures and aspires to higher things. Always especially attracted by such people, it was with him that Socrates had gone down to Piraeus in the first place. Piraeus is the port city of Athens. Athens is actually not on the sea. It's interesting because Plato wrote the Republic, but Socrates is a character in the Republic, and Socrates is actually speaking for Plato, and Glaucon is Plato's brother. Okay, so Glaucon. Okay, so page 1007. We're going to give you an idea here. I'm not going to read everything to do with Glaucon and homosexuality. I'm just going to read a couple of sections. While I'd always admired the natures of Glaucon and Adeimantus, I was especially pleased on this occasion. And I said, "You are the sons of a great man." And Glaucon's lover began his elegy well when he wrote, celebrating your achievements at the Battle of Megara, sons of Ariston, godlike offspring of a famous man. That's well said, in my opinion. For you must indeed be affected by the divine, if you're not convinced that injustice is better than justice, and yet can speak on its behalf as you have done. So even though it's been introduced the idea that injustice is better than justice, and they can't really argue with it because it looks like a good argument, nevertheless, they're just like, I don't think so. That's because of their godlike nature. Alrighty. All right. 474. Okay, we're going to go to 1095. This is a good one. Now, this thing where we keep mixing up homosexuality with boy loving, this was a problem back then too. This is in page 1095 in the book, section 468b. But don't you think that anyone who distinguishes himself and earns high esteem should, while still on the campaign, first be crowned with wreaths by each of the adolescents and children who accompany the expedition? I do, says Glaucon. And what about shaken by the right hand? That too, says Glaucon. But I suppose that you wouldn't go this far, namely, that he should kiss and be kissed by each of them. That most of all, and I'll add this to the law. You see, these are adolescents and children. Okay, but Glaucon's a homosexual. I am a homosexual. Glaucon speaks for me. I will add this to the law. As long as the campaign lasts, no one he wants to kiss shall be allowed to refuse. For then, if one of them happens to be in love with another, whether male or female, he'll be all the more eager to win the rewards of valor. Okay. Now, this is complicated. Plato believed that the best relationship was an erotically charged relationship between two men, but you don't consummate. And so, again, this is my reading. I can respect it if you disagree. The idea that his brother had that kind of relationship with his lover is just, no, it's just not happening. So he has a gay brother and he should know better. Okay. Now we're going to look at 474C through 475. This is a good one. Plato is pissing off Glaucon, or actually Socrates is pissing off Glaucon. This is where, again, I'm not a boy lover. I am a homosexual. And this is where Glaucon jumps in. Okay. Do you need to be reminded, or do you remember that if it's rightly said that someone loves something, then he mustn't love one part of it and not another, but he must love all of it? Okay? I think you'll have to remind me, for I don't understand it at all. Oh, that would be an appropriate response, Glaucon, for someone else to make. But isn't it appropriate for an erotically inclined man to forget that all the boys in the bloom of youth pique the interest of a lover of boys and arouse him, and that all seem worthy of his care and pleasure? Or isn't that the way you people behave to fine and beautiful boys? You praise a snub-nosed one as cute, a hook-nosed one you say is regal, and one in between is well-proportioned. Dark ones look manly. Of course we do. And pale ones are children of the gods. And as for a honey-colored boy, who apparently they don't like, these are the really white people. Do you think that this very term is anything but the euphemistic coinage of a lover who found it easy to tolerate sallowness, and provided it was accompanied by the bloom of youth? In a word, you find all kinds of terms and excuses so as not to reject anyone whose flower is in bloom. So if you love something, you love all of it. And so when you people fall in love with boys, you fall in love with it, and you're always making excuses for them, even if they're like really white. If you insist on taking me as your example of what erotically inclined men do, then for the sake of argument, I agree. But you're pissing me off. You have to separate us from the boy lovers. Okay, in both cases, he speaks for me. And now, do you remember me telling you that they're lying about the Bible? They've been lying about it for a long time. Boom, boom, boom. I found it. I found it. Alrighty. This is the laws, the last thing that he wrote. Now, here's the thing. Where did it come from? We have Judean Christians holding Plato against the new Christians that are coming in, who are some of whom are gay. Obviously, there's a problem with some of them being homosexuals. Sometime after he wrote the Republic, No, it has to come from Plato, because he's already saying nasty things about us gay people. Sometime after he wrote the Republic, he was introduced to Moses. I suspect already by the time of the Republic that he'd read the book of Daniel. But I know he read it. And my book, by the way, is about Atlantis. Critias, among many things, it's complicated, but I know what Atlantis is. I know where the story comes from. The religion of the Atlanteans is from the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Ezekiel. So the fate of Atlantis, for example, is in Ezekiel 26, 19 through 23, the city of Tyre. You can see it in the Hebrew, but not really in, might not be able to see in your English translation. Ezekiel 31, 15, the fate of Assyria, the Assyrian Empire. Okay? So he's read the Bible, and he has some stuff in there that I believe came from an interpretation of the book of Leviticus. When we get to the Bible, we're going to talk about Leviticus 18:22 and 20:13. Because although Moses is talking about homosexual behavior, specific behavior, he ain't talking about us homosexuals. And in the book that he wrote later, the book of Deuteronomy, he goes out of his way to show that I'm not talking about homosexuals, I'm talking about homosexual behavior in this particular case. Alrighty. So this is page, the laws, going to be page 1330 in our book. Again, it's the last thing that he wrote. And he didn't even publish it. It was published, it might not even have been finished. But this is the policy. There are three characters. There's the Athenian, who's Plato. Plato also was the beginning. He was channeling Socrates. And then he's really starting to come into his own and speak for himself. And then he's the character of Socrates. And now at the later stage, he's the Athenian. So he's really become his own person. You can see the psychological process. There's Clinias, who is a Spartan. Megillus is a Spartan and Clinias is a Cretan. These are the Spartans and the Cretans are related. They are the greatest warriors of all of Greece. Keep that in mind. Case in the military. Well then, Clinias and our friend from Sparta, let's turn to the next item we put on the agenda. After courage, let's discuss self-control. We found in the case of war that your two political systems were superior to those of states with a more haphazard mode of government. Where's the superiority in the case of self-control? So, courage, of course, to be a warrior. Self-control, honestly, obviously, courage under fire, control under fire. Where's the superiority in the case of self-control? Why are you and the Spartans, who are related, better than us? Megillus. That's a rather difficult question. Still, I should think the common meals and the gymnastic exercises are institutions well calculated to promote both virtues. Athenian. Well, my friends, I think the real difficulty is to make political systems reflect in practice the trouble-free perfection of theory. The human body is probably a parallel. One cannot rigidly prescribe a given regime for a given body, because any regime will invariably turn out in some respects to injure our bodies at the same time it helps them in others. For instance, cheers to you. These gymnastic exercises and common meals, useful though they are to a state in many ways, are a danger in their encouragement of revolution. Witness the example of the youth at Miletus, Boeotus, and Thurii. More especially, the very antiquity of these practices seems to have corrupted the natural pleasures of sex. Here we are back to Paul, which are common to man and beast. These perversions, your two states may well be the first to be blamed. For these perversions, your two states may well be the first to be blamed, as well as any others that make a particular point of gymnastic exercises. Circumstances may make you treat this subject that I'm about to bring up, either lightheartedly or seriously. In either case, you ought to bear in mind that when male and female come together in order to have a child, the pleasure they experience seems to arise naturally. But homosexual intercourse and lesbianism seem to be unnatural crimes of the first rank and are committed because men and women cannot control their desire for pleasure. That doesn't come from the Bible. That comes from Plato. There's a heavy influence of Deuteronomy on Plato. Now, you fag bashers, I'm not just getting after you. There's a lot of stuff going on in biblical scholarship that they're just getting wrong. Like, I keep saying Deuteronomy was written by Moses. Modern scholars deny that. They're purposely being dense about certain things. Anyway, heavy influence from Deuteronomy. Now, by the way, if you want to read a guy who says it goes the opposite direction, that Jews read Plato and then wrote the Bible, this is one of his books. I'm about to order the third one. I have two of them. Plato and the Creation of the Hebrew Bible by Russell E. Gamirkin. If you think I'm crazy because I'm saying things like Plato read Moses, trust me, the parallels are extreme. They are through the roof. And his next one is specifically on Timaeus and the creation and the book of Genesis. Men and women cannot control their desire for pleasure. It is the Cretans we all hold to blame for making up the story of Ganymede. When they are so firmly convinced that their laws came from Zeus that they saddled him with this fable in order to have a divine precedent when enjoying that particular pleasure. That story we may dismiss. Okay. Now again, he's a young man, he's a youth, Ganymede, and he's abducted by Zeus to be his sexual partner, his cupbearer and sexual partner in heaven, in Olympus. They made that up. The story of Zeus and Ganymede is true. Jesus treats it as true. It is true. I guarantee you it's true. I'm going to talk about that in Sodom and Gomorrah because it's still happening. You ever see, is his name David Paulides? Paulides, Paulides. He talks about people who are missing in national parks a lot. Very common for handsome, intelligent young men to just flat out, and they're fucking disappearing. That happened. But we're kind of mixing up kind of a little bit boy loving and that kind of stuff. You remember when I read about the boys, oh, this one's stub nose and this one, it sounded like a 13-year-old girl. And that's another reason why Glaucon was kind of insulted by Plato. I was like, do you think I'm a 13-year-old girl? Oh, he's so cute, he's dreamy, and look at his eyes, and he's dark, and he's so handsome. No. So stop mixing us up. And there's a little bit of that there because Ganymede is a youth. And now I'm going to get to the policy, actually, where he actually advocates it. In every detail, everything I noticed about what was going on with homosexuality in the Bible. Think about this. If you were a gay Spartan, how did you meet your future husband? You grew up with him. He is with Spartans and Cretans. Who watched gay people grow up together and fall in love and stay together and suffer together. You go to gymnastics and you go to military training and you go fight wars, and you've known each other from the time you were boys, and your mom and your parents knew each other, and they knew your mother, and they knew your brothers and sisters, and they knew your cousins, and you worked out together and you suffered together. It's marriage. It is so incredibly healthy. Here he has an amazing, robust gay brother, and he's talking to these Spartans who really kind of think he's kind of crazy. Homosexuality, what the hell are you talking, being evil, what are you talking about? They don't, because it's just not part of their experience. This is why I can tell you that what happened to us gay people is your fault. You were torturing us for centuries. How are we supposed to have these higher level relationships? And of course, the friends that we hooked up with, they dump pornography on us, which overloads our brain, breaks our brain. Incredibly healthy. So now we're going to go 1497 and 1499. Now, This first reading from the laws that I've just read you is from book 1 of the laws. Okay? If you get this section, it's 635E to 636F. Okay? The healthy gay part. Now I'm going to move on to page 1497. In this book. This is going to move us up to book 8, 1495, 1497. I'm going to read from 1497 and 1499. 1497 is the sections 835B through 837, 838A through 838C for the ones on 1495. 1497, 1499. But now for something which is not a triviality at all. It's a point on which it is difficult to convince people, and God himself is really the only person to do it. Supposing, that is, we could in fact somehow get explicit instructions from him. Remember me telling you they're not getting this from the Bible? They're not getting this from God. This is not coming from God. And Plato here admits it, that he can't get this to come from a God. Since that's impossible, it looks as if we need some intrepid mortal who values frankness above all, to specify the policy he believes best for the state and its citizens, to give a firm no to our most compelling passions. And again, it's an orientation. It's not just like, women bore me because I've been screwing so many of them, now it's time for me to go for guys. What's best for the state and its citizens, give a firm no to our most compelling passions, and order his audience of corrupted souls to observe standards of conduct in keeping with and implied by the whole organization of the state. There will be no one to back him up. He'll walk alone with reason alone to guide him. So he has to say that because Spartans and Cretans, who are the best warriors among the Greeks, think it's kind of crazy that we should ban homosexuals. Because you're kind of not going to have a Spartan army without us. You wouldn't have won, the Second Crusade with Richard the Lionhearted without us. You would have been decades behind computer science without us. You would have had the Renaissance without us. There will be no one to back him up. He'll walk alone with reason alone to guide him. What topic is this, sir? We don't see what you're getting at. You see, he has to beat around the bush. This is Clinius talking. I think that's a Spartan. I get those two mixed up. We don't see what you're getting at. Well, that's not surprising. Well, I'll try to put the point more explicitly. When I come to discuss education, I envision young men and women associating with each other on friendly terms. Naturally enough, I began to feel some disquiet. I wondered how one could handle a state like this, with everyone engaged in a lifelong round of sacrifices. We must obey the gods. In festivals and chorus performances, dancing and singing. And the young men and women, well-nourished and free of those demanding and degrading jobs that damp down lust so effectively. Reason, which is embodied in law as far as can be, tells us to avoid indulging the passions that have ruined so many people. So how will the members of our state avoid them? And then there's some parenthetical statements. But there are sexual urges too, of boys and girls, and heterosexual love among adults. What precautions should one take against passions that have such a powerful effect on public and private life? It's a great problem, Clinius. We're faced with the fact that though in several other respects, Crete in general and Sparta give us plenty solid help when we frame laws that flout common custom, in affairs of the heart, there's no one listening, so let's be frank, they are totally opposed to us. Suppose you follow nature's rule and establish the law that was enforced before the time of Laius. Laius, the father of Oedipus, abducted the son of Pelops, his host, thus inaugurating homosexual attachments between men and teenage boys. You keep bringing it back to that. Suppose you follow nature's rule before the time of Laius. You'd argue that one may have sexual intercourse with a woman, but not with men or boys. See, now it brings in men. As evidence to your view, you point to the animal world. You would point to the animal world where you would argue incorrectly, that males do not have sexual relations with each other because such a thing is unnatural. It all comes from Plato. It's not from the Bible. And there is homosexuality among animals. It's well documented. But in Crete and Sparta, your argument will not go down at all well. You probably persuade nobody. Yeah, because of our lived experience. Yeah, because we've seen for our own eyes that homosexuality is fine. It's perfectly natural. It's something that happens. However, another argument is that such practices are incompatible with what, in our view, should be the constant aim of the legislator. That is, we're asking, which of our regulations encourage virtues and which do not? See, this is my critique of Plato. You're saying that clamping down on this encourages virtue. You're wrong, because first of all, you're making people lie. And you're terrorizing people. Just to keep going. Now then, suppose that in the present case we agreed to pass a law that such practices are desirable, or not at all undesirable, homosexuality. What contribution would they make to virtue? Will the spirit of courage spring to life in the soul of the seduced person? Yes. I would have been a much better athlete. I mean, when I was in high school, I little gay guy, turns out my personality type, we're not very good at catching at the physical world. We kind of flop around like a fish on a rock. It's one of the reasons why I wasn't really into sports. But I was terrified of being on a team and getting a locker room and getting a hard on. That terrified me. So I stayed away from that. But you sweat together and you suffer together, and then he's kind of cute. Oh, he thinks I'm cute too. Perfectly natural. Okay, will the soul of the seducer learn habits of self-control? Of course. No one is going to be led astray by that sort of argument. Quite the contrary. Yeah, that's because you're not really having it. Yes, it will make, I'm 56 years old. I discovered about 4 or 5 years ago that I love boxing. I was like, oh, I would have been a great boxer. I mean, I wouldn't have been like a contender, but I think I would have been pretty good. I would have been very efficient. My punches would have been pretty brutal. My number one goal would have been to move as little as possible and move as efficiently as possible. And I could see me with a boxer's body and get a little boyfriend, my first boyfriend. Absolutely natural. Now here's the exact policy. 1497. Oh, we're actually there. And now we need to go to 1499. Alrighty, we continue. 438A. Now, this is why I'm a little confused about where this attack on homosexuality came from, because he obviously had a bias against us in the Republic. But I think this got fed in by the people who introduced him to Moses, because this stuff is coming from, as I'm going to show you, this stuff that I'm about to read is coming from Leviticus, from their interpretation of Leviticus. Let's be careful. I want to put the law on this subject on a firm footing. At the moment, I'm thinking of a method which is, in a sense, simplicity itself. But from another point of view, nothing could be harder. What are you getting at? We are aware, of course, that even nowadays, most men, in spite of their general disregard for the law, are very effectively prevented from having relations with people they find attractive. And they don't refrain reluctantly either. They're more than happy to. What circumstances have you in mind? So, when is a person wildly attracted to somebody, but no way in hell they're going to do it, and they would never even want to do it, although they might think about it? What circumstances have you in mind? When it's one's brother or sister whom one finds attractive. And the same law, written though it is extremely effective at stopping man sleeping, secretly or otherwise, with his son or daughter, or making any kind of amorous approach to them. Most people feel not the faintest desire for such intercourse. That's perfectly true. So the desire of this sort of pleasure is stifled by a few words. So the desire of this sort of pleasure, homosexuality, is stifled by a few words. What words do you mean? The exact policy, the doctrine that, quote, and he has little quotes here, the translator does, these acts are absolutely unholy, an abomination in the sight of gods. The names, and nothing is more revolting. Abomination is from Leviticus, but it's to'eva, which is a ritual abomination. Because although it is a homosexual act, it's a ritual. I'll talk about that. Abomination, and also there's statutes against incest. And so it's linked together. Those two links right there, this is coming from Leviticus. We refrain from them because we never hear them spoken in any other way. So you're a little gay boy, and this is all you hear your whole freaking life. From the day of our birth, each of us encounters a complete unanimity of opinion wherever we go. We find it not only in comedies, but often in the high seriousness of tragedy too, when we see a Thyestes on the stage, in intercourse with his daughter, or an Oedipus who married his own mother, or a Macarius, the clandestine lover of his sister. We watch these characters dying promptly by their own hand or as a penalty for their crimes. You're right in this in any way, that no one ventures to challenge the law. When no one ventures to challenge the law, public opinion works wonders. How are we supposed to live with that? What do you think that's going to do to the psyche of a young man, of a young gay man? Look at what you stole from us. Look at what we do to you, and look at how you treat us and how you talk to us. Abominations, hated by God, right up there with people who commit incest. What do you think that does to us? Do you think liberation, yay, is suddenly going to make us normal people, able to interact with people properly? And I have to say, nevertheless, despite that, we've done all the wonderful things we've done, we did have good instincts, because early on there's a movie called The Boys at the Band, and they did a reworking. And that's us coming to grips with how a man is to love another man. Now it's time to move from the Bible, or to the Bible. Now it's time to move to the Bible. Now, one last thing before we go into the Bible. Now, remember me talking about this when I was talking about Plato? This is a mandala, round in shape. Now, my favorite guy in the whole world is a guy named C.G. Young. And I have a lot of his books. C.G. Young. This is part of his Young library, his collection of his paper. Now, very early in his career, C.G. Young worked through a lot of mandalas. He talked about mandalas. And basically, it's the sum total of the psyche, of the human psyche. And it's it's a projection of the unconscious onto the world. Okay, and I talk about how that's important to reading anybody. And of course, and this is how I know that Plato had a generally balanced psyche, because I could follow through on his projections. Now, homosexuality, I believe, troubled him because he had in his head this mandala. Now we're back to the Laws, Book 8, 835D. When I came to discuss education, I envisioned young men and women associating with each other on friendly terms. Naturally enough, I began to feel some disquiet. So here we go. I wondered how one could handle a state like this, with everyone engaged in a lifelong round of sacrifices and festivals and chorus performances, and young men and young women, well-nourished and free of those demanding and degrading jobs that damp down lust so effectively. Reason, which is embodied in law as far as it can be, tells us to avoid indulging the passions that have ruined so many people. So how will the members of our state avoid them? He keeps saying that this comes from too much passion, and it just doesn't fit into his mandala. It kind of breaks up the rhythm. But first of all, I believe there's the idea of the gay uncle, the fun gay uncle. I believe that we do play a role in that. It's just not the role that he saw coming. And also, maybe we do destroy that revolution. Maybe it needs to be broken down. Maybe it's neurotic. And that's what a lot of us homosexuals are doing. I mean, I just shrug my shoulders and just walk away from the Globohomo and the family values. But a lot of us are really, really disruptive, out to destroy. You see that especially with my hero, Frankenfurter, in Rocky Horror Picture Show. Excuse me. Nothing to do without our water. Making fun of Brad and Janet. Okay, so maybe this does need to be broken up. Because what we're looking at here in this mandala, and in the planets revolving around the sun, and the world on the knee of necessity back in the Republic, what they represent is what C.G. Jung noticed to be a circumambulation, or annunciodramia, which is really circumambulation seen from the side. This is the way the mind moves. And it's just too disruptive for him, and he can't figure it out. I think that's what's going on. It really bothered him. And these people who are misinterpreting, I would say purposely misinterpreting, these Judeans, who are misinterpreting Leviticus and bringing this to his attention, I believe that they preyed on that. It's not necessarily an excuse, but I think it's a very good explanation. Now let's go into our Bible. Question. Why do you assume that the ancient Israelites had the same attitude towards homosexuality that we did? Who told you that they did? If the typical dating of Moses, according to the Bible, is correct, this is 3,400 years ago. Turns out, starting about 2,000 years ago, and then little after, and then moving until the time of Plato, I believe Plato ended it, you have what could be called the Age of Heroes. And we gay people started it. We gay people started it, and we were a big part of it. We were big part of the Age of Heroes. The Israelites were part of that. Yes, they were. I'm going to show that. And so when I'm reading these passages from the Bible, and I'm putting my interpretation of them, you're looking back as a modern person, and you're thinking, that's just impossible. That's very difficult to believe, Bill. But you have to look up. You have to look up to it from the past, and you'll see that, no, that's exactly what they're saying. We look at the Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Who are their people? Where do they come from? This is what we would like to know. The Bible tells us. The book of Ezekiel, chapter 16, verse 3, and chapter 16, verse 45, page 1073. We're going to get a lot of interesting things out of the book of Ezekiel. We'll do 1 through 3. The word of Yahweh came to me. Son of man, make known to Jerusalem her abominations, and say, Thus says Lord Yahweh to Jerusalem, your origin and your birth were in the land of the Canaanites, not a surprise. Your father was an Amorite, and your mother a Hittite. Who are these people? We had no idea until archaeology told us. 45. You are the daughter of your mother, Hittite, who loathed her husband and her children, Amorite. Your mother was a Hittite and your father an Amorite. What's going on here? Here's what we know now. The Hittites went to war with the Amorites. You see, the Amorites had gone into Mesopotamia from Syria, about there, and they found a sleepy little administrative village called Babylon. And they built it up into a great city. Now the Hittites went to war with Babylon, and they destroyed it. And either they drove the Amorites out of Babylon, or they made conditions so unbearable that they had to leave it. And so when you hear about the old Babylonian Empire, those are the Amorites. They're followed by the Kassites, who were there about 700 years, and then those are followed by the Chaldeans. And when you hear about the fall of Jerusalem, it's the Chaldean, and by Babylon, the conquest of Jerusalem, it's the Chaldeans who are ruling Babylon. About 1,000 years later, something like that. That's who they are. It's about 1600 BC. There's problems with the archaeology conflicting with the geology, because there's about 200-year period where everything's out of whack. You might see it dated about 1600 BC. I've seen it as late as 1400 BC, because nobody can really be sure. So let's look. Why is that important? Okay. Amorites founded Babylon as a great city, which I've discussed. Wrote the Code of Hammurabi, often compared to Moses' law. Surely you've heard the Code of Hammurabi. They found us stories from the people known as Sumerians, lived there previously, of a king named Gilgamesh and his beloved servant named Enkidu. And they wove those together into what we know today as the Epic of Gilgamesh. The evolution of the Gilgamesh epic. Very important because they made changes to those stories about Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Yes, they did. This was done during the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The changes are critical to understanding what Moses thought about homosexuality. Why? You're about to find out. The interesting thing is there almost certainly is no creation story for Enkidu. He's not any kind of divine creation in the original stories, but he becomes what is called in the Akkadian, the language it's written in, a Lulu Amilu. That's a primordial man. And then he's created by a goddess. Okay? Now in the Bible, you have Adam. Well, Adam's actually not his name. He is the Adam. Ha-Adam. He is the earthling or the groundling, and his name became earthling. So Adam is a primordial man, just like Enkidu, Lulu Amilu, right? Take the creation story of Enkidu, put it next to the creation story of Adam, and you will see it's the same story. The author of the Epic of Gilgamesh knew the story of Adam and Eve, and he expected his audience to know that story. Right? So why does Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh hears about this Lulu Amilu. Hunters have traps for their prey, but he keeps running around freeing the prey. So what does he do to deal with this primordial being? He sends a woman, he sends a prostitute. Oh, this is going to be important. This is going to come up. These prostitutes are important. Named Shamhat. And in the part of the story of Adam and Eve, it's kind of a comedy. In part of the story of Adam and Eve, the part where Adam and Eve are ashamed of being naked, Enkidu is just naked. He's naked as could be. And all his boy bits are all hanging out. And so Shamhat, who's a prostitute, has to take her clothes, tear them in half, and cover up his boy bits with her clothes. So a prostitute has to teach Enkidu about modesty. Cue the laugh track. Also, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. This is the part of the comedy. This is a primordial man, so Gilgamesh sends him a woman, an Eve. But this primordial man was created by the goddess for Enkidu. This Adam was not made for an Eve, he was made for a Steve. He was made to be Gilgamesh's lover. Part of the comedy. Yes. Now, Enkidu moves from being a beloved servant of Gilgamesh to his homosexual lover under the Amorites. Because now there is something called Enkidu or Gilgamesh in the underworld. In the older stories for the Sumerians, he's called Gilgamesh. But we'll just say Gilgamesh in the underworld. We have a Sumerian version and we have a later Amorite version. Here are the exact parallel texts. Gilgamesh is talking to Enkidu, and Enkidu is saying, well, there's a woman here who's your lover. And he's talking about this woman. The one who handled your penis, so you were glad at heart. Her vulva is infested with vermin like an old cloak. For the Amorite version, the one who handled your penis, my friend, the penis that you touched. So your heart rejoiced, grubs devour it. The crotch that you touched, so your heart rejoiced. It is filled with dust like a crack in the ground. Made him into homosexual lovers. All you people talking shit about us, saying we're projecting into the Bible like with David and Jonathan, that this is modern sensibility. We've known about the Epic of Gilgamesh, about the Amorites for more than 100 years. And you all acting ignorant all the time. And this is your consistent pattern with you people. You start acting stupid when it's inconvenient for you. Now the Hittites. The Hittites are Indo-European. That's a shock. The Amorites are Semites. They're Western Semites. Hebrew is a Western Semitic language, no surprise. The Hittites are Indo-European. They're related to the Greeks and the Romans. That's a surprise. The book of Deuteronomy is a Hittite treaty between Yahweh and Israel. Now, this is a suzerainty treaty, something like that. It's a treaty between a sovereign and vassals. Okay? These treaties are to be kept in the temple of the vassals. Now, King David designed and King Solomon built a temple based on a Hittite temple. Deuteronomy is a Bronze Age Hittite treaty. It's based on a Bronze Age Hittite temple at a place called Ain Dara in northern Syria. In the Bronze Age collapsed about 1200 BC, then the Iron Age. You hear about King David in them, that's the Iron Age. Moses is in the late Bronze Age. It's a Bronze Age treaty, and it's put in a temple designed after a Bronze Age Hittite temple, and they're both Hittites. Okay, here's an interesting part. Scholars are telling you that David and Solomon weren't really that important, if they even existed. David designed this temple based on the Hittite temple, but it had an innovation. It had side chambers built into it. After King Solomon, we know from the archaeology in northern Syria, after King Solomon would have built that temple, they upgraded the temple at Ain Dara and they added side chambers. So they saw what Solomon did and they liked it and they upgraded their temple. We have Hittite loyalty oaths that we know are in the Bible. Where is that? If you look at 1 Samuel chapter 21, talking about a priest named Ahimelech and a place called Nob Hill. What King Saul does to Ahimelech looks horrible, but we have found a loyalty oath between priests and the great king of the Hatti. And what King Saul does to Ahimelech and the priests, that's what the oath says is going to happen to you if you betray. And King Saul accuses Ahimelech of betraying him. So we have Hittite loyalty oaths. They're presided over a goddess named Ishtarah. Ishtarah is important. Why is that? Also important for the Amorites. She's an Amorite goddess, actually. Ishtarah is the goddess of weddings. Now, again, you can compare the Amorite epic of Gilgamesh with the earlier Sumerian stories. When we have Gilgamesh fighting the bull of heaven, it starts out with Gilgamesh being harassed by the temple prostitutes representing Inanna, the goddess of love. I think it's Inanna, the Sumerian version of Ishtar and Aphrodite. And there's this ritual where the king has sex with his prostitute, therefore the king has sex with the goddess, because they're channeling the goddess. Okay? They changed that. What's going on is Gilgamesh has primus nocte, the right of first night. A man marries a woman, the king or the sovereign has a right to go into her on their wedding night and have sex with her before the bride can. Okay? This is called, in the Akkadian, you won't ever see this in your translation, this is called bed of Ishtarah. Bed of Ishtarah. Okay? Enkidu intercepts Gilgamesh precisely when he's headed to this bed of Ishtarah. So the Babylonians really hated it. And that's what starts the fight between Gilgamesh and Enkidu, and they meet and they fall in love. By the way, twinship shows up here. This is Douglas Frame, Hippodonester, talking about twinship. Twinship, when you talk about man and woman, male and female, complementarianism, the sun and the moon, night and day. For us homosexuals, it's twinship, sacred twinship that comes into play. Mirror imaging each other. Okay? So now that we have the background, let's go get these clobber passages. Oh my God, I'm going to go read this on Leviticus 18:22 and 20:13. Oh my God, and I'm just going to be devastated because God hates fags, right? Well, not so fast. 18, so we're going to go to page 149 in our Bible. Not so fast, my friend. Leviticus 18:22. We're going to go to 21 first, because it's right after this. You shall not give any of your offspring to sacrifice them to Molech, and so profane the name of your God. I am Yahweh. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. Toeva. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. That's not what the Hebrew says, but we'll get back to that. 20:13, but we'll start out first, chapter 20, verses 2 through 3. Say to the people of Israel, any of the people of Israel or of the aliens who reside in Israel, who give any of their offspring to Molech, shall be put to death. The people of the land shall stone them to death. So there's something to do in both cases with Molech. So let's go to 13. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall be put to death. Their blood is upon them. Problem. It doesn't say male as with a woman. It says male bed of woman. And the bed of and woman in Hebrew is Isha. Bed of Ishara, Amorite, bed of Isha. It's the same thing. When it says abomination, it's toeva. This is ritual abomination. There's some kind of ritual going on here. So we'll read this again properly. You shall not lie with a male bed of woman. It is toeva. If a man lies with a male bed of woman, both of them have committed a toeva. They've committed an abomination. They shall be put to death. Their blood is upon them. So what I'm saying is it's a male bed of woman, and there's also a female bed of woman. That this is some kind of ritual thing where a man lies with another man with some kind of wedding bed thing going on. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. Can I prove it? Yes, I can. Remember, bed of woman, abomination, put to death, blood upon your hands. It turns out there is a commentary on those very verses in the book of Ezekiel. Remember what I said. We're going to start in Ezekiel 23:17, page 1086. Okay. And the Babylonians came to Jerusalem, into the bed of love. And they defiled her with their lust, and she defiled herself with them. When she'd done that, she turned from them in disgust. When she carried on her whoring so openly and flaunted her nakedness, I turned in disgust from her, as I had turned from her sister. Bed of love. Bed of woman, bed of love. Further commentary. Chapter 18, verses 10 through 13, 1078. If he, who's a righteous man, has a son who is violent, a shedder of blood, who does any of these things, though his father does none of them, who eats upon the mountains, defiles his neighbor's wife, oppresses the poor and needy, commits robbery, does not restore the pledge, lifts up his eyes to the idol, bed of love, the idolatry, commits abomination, takes advance or accrued interest, shall he then live? He shall not. He has done all these abominable things. Abomination, he shall surely die. His blood shall be upon himself. So that is what can be considered a commentary from the 6th century BC on that passage, and it backs me up. There's another problem that you have. If you're going to make this as a generalized statement against homosexuality, is this bed of woman, male or otherwise, does not show up in the book of Deuteronomy. But Deuteronomy means second law. Now, all of these laws in Deuteronomy, it turns out Deuteronomy is a treaty. I talked about that before, but we didn't even know that till the 20th century. But it is nevertheless shows up as the laws of Leviticus are repeated in Deuteronomy. And here is where the bed of love, the bed of woman, the bed of love, here's where it shows up. It's in chapter 23, 17 through 18. Now in chapter 18 of Leviticus, this thing with the bed of woman is in there with passages dealing with incest and bestiality, having sex with animals, okay? So you could kind of say that it appears, if you don't know what a bed of woman is or the bed of Ishara, you could say, well, maybe it is about having sex with a man as with a woman. It's a shot in the dark, but it's possible. This right here tells you that you're not allowed to do that. If that was on its own, then yeah, I could see, but it's not on its own. The counterpart for that passage is in Leviticus or Deuteronomy 23, 17 through 18. Now, whereas in there, it's all about sex stuff, here, the law in front of it is about escaped slaves. The law after it is about interest on loans being prohibited. Remember, one of the things the evil son does is he takes the interest on loans. And I told you it's a commentary on Leviticus, and one of the things is interest on loans. And here we have the parallel right next to interest on loans being prohibited. So what I'm about to read you shows that you cannot be talking about homosexuality. This is going to be page 248. Okay. This is going to be a little weird because I do not like the translation here. Okay. There shall be no Kadishah among the daughters of Israel, nor shall there be a Kaddish among the sons of Israel. You shall not bring the fee of a prostitute or the wages of a dog, a male prostitute, into the house of Yahweh your Lord, your God, in payment for any vow, for both of these are abhorrent to Yahweh your God. So we have a Kadishah and a Kaddish, which is a Kadishah and a Kaddish, which is a male Kadishah. We have bed of woman, male bed of woman. Kadishah, Kaddish. Right next to prostitute, female prostitute, male prostitute. Kaddish is the Hebrew root for holy. Kadishah is the feminine ending. Let there be no Kadishah among the daughters of Israel. Let there be no Kaddish of the sons of Israel. So, what is a feminine of holy? Holly. So, the way I translate it, here's the way I would translate this passage. There shall be no holly of the daughters of Israel, nor shall there be a holy among the sons of Israel. You shall not bring the fee of a prostitute or the wages of a dog into the house of Yahweh your God in payment for any vow, for both of these are abhorrent to Yahweh your God. Now, these Kadishah and the Kaddish have shown up outside of the Bible. In the Bronze Age collapse, there's a city named Ugarit. And we know that they also did dancing, they also did singing. It's a class of priests and priestesses. So the bed of woman, male bed of woman, Kaddish, Kadishah, we have the commentary on Leviticus coming from Ezekiel. Everything is saying, all this is from the Bible, by the way, you don't need any archaeology. Everything here is saying that if you are saying that Leviticus is about homosexuality, you are wrong. There's no way you can be right. But there's something else. There's something else dealing with this Kadishah and the Kaddish. If you go to Genesis chapter 38, it's a story of Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar. I'm not going to go into a full story, but I'll tell you this. For reasons that are obvious in the story, Tamar disguises herself as a prostitute, has sex with her father-in-law, because he was supposed to give her one of his sons so she can have children, because she was married to two of his older sons, and gets pregnant. Okay? In the logic of the story, it sounds freaky to us. She's doing the right thing. She's doing what needs to be done. So all the way through the story, Judah's visiting this whore, and she gets pregnant. So obviously she must have been whoring around because she's not married. So we got to go kill Judith. You know, whore, that's all over the place. But what had happened was she was in disguise. He didn't know who she was. And he was supposed to give her money, but he didn't have any money to pay for. So she gave him, I think, his cloak and his cane as to hold on to until he brought the money. Well, he sends his friend in with the money, and he's looking for this whore. Okay? And then he stops a stranger who lives there, and he says, excuse me. All of a sudden his language changes. Have you seen the Kadishah who was here at the corner? And the local's like, there ain't no Kadishah here, buddy. Because he knows that he's actually looking for the prostitute that he slept with, because he saw that prostitute. So proving that Kadishah is related to a prostitute, related to whore, but of a higher status. And that's what Leviticus is about. And that's exactly what it's about. And now finally, we're going to go into the book of 1 Samuel, where we have a bona fide gay wedding, and I'm going to prove it. Now I come to my final push to victory, where I show that the Bible is in favor of gay marriage. So let's talk about that before we get started. Even if it weren't true, now that the Bible is against gay marriage, is in favor of gay marriage, all of you who like to prance around with your family values, morals, and talk trash about us homosexuals, as you'll see here, it's just amazing how you just love to have your cake and eat it too. How you just love to lay down a set of rules and we're supposed to just bow down and follow them. And we're not supposed to say anything about them. Well, the states are supposed to decide if we're going to allow gay marriage. I'm just like, yeah, well, the states are supposed to have full faith and credit of other states' proceedings, other states' contracts. So if I'm in Texas and I go to California to get married, when I come back, guess what? To another man, guess what? I'm married, but not with you people. And every single time you could possibly have something to do with homosexuality in the Bible, you're all for it. That's against it. But then when we find something as about to show you here that we've been pointing to for centuries, you tell us, oh, just shut up. You're just reading into things. There's no way that could be happening. Remember Gilgamesh, written during the lifetime of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? What are you freaking talking about? Of course we could be reading into this, but we're not necessarily. You're the one reading into this. You're reading your sensibilities about homosexuals in the Bible, which I think I've demonstrated you got from Plato, who might have got it from Judeans who have purposely misinterpreted the Bible. So now let's go to our gay wedding. If you track arguments over homosexuality in the Bible, you know where I'm talking about. Although you're probably surprised that I'm calling it a wedding. I will demonstrate that completely. Now, I was looking at a professor interviewed on the internet talking about King David. And a lot of people think that King David and King Solomon didn't even exist, that it's a ridiculous story. He says actually he speaks for me because I've been saying this for quite a while. He said, I know King David is alive because there were serious accusations leveled against him. And stories about King David are trying to take what is true, that everybody knew is true, and then try to mold it in a way to make King David look good. So an accusation, and I've followed him up on that, and this is one that I'm sure he doesn't agree with, but one of the accusations against David is that he was a gay for pay con artist who had manipulated Prince Jonathan and stole his kingdom away from him. Now, what was it about the accusations? And I'm going to show that it's in the Bible. What is it about these accusations that they had to admit to? Well, they had to admit that he's kind of he could be dishonest and he could be a con artist. We know that not only from the stories I'm about to tell you here, but from his own family. There's basically a quote from his own family. We know that he was a heterosexual, for sure. Gay for pay means while he's having sex with men, he's actually a heterosexual. That he was a con artist who manipulated Prince Jonathan. It could not be denied that he had sexual relationships with Prince Jonathan. And how does the Bible deal with that accusation? It has to admit that all that's true. It has to say, yes, David was a heterosexual. Yes, he can be kind of a con artist, but he really loved Jonathan. They loved each other, and as a matter of fact, they were married. And I'm going to be all over this. I'm not just going to read the text and other texts in the Bible to back that up. I'm going to get all meta about it. What does meta mean? Meta means about. Metadata is, this video is the video, that's the data. Meta is, here's the name of the video, this is what it's about, this is who made it, this is when it was made. I'm going to get meta because there's some stuff that the Bible is pointing to, the author is pointing to back up his story. So we'll start with the con artist. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 28 through 30. Now what's going on is we have this giant Goliath along with the Philistines, who are rivals of the Israelites. They end up becoming frenemies, friends but enemies at the same time, jealous of each other. And this giant Goliath is making fun of Yahweh and making fun of the Israelites. And he demands that the Israelites send out a champion to fight him. Now, the young David has shown up, and he's asking everybody around what's going on. His eldest brother, Eliab, heard him talking to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. He said, "Why have you come down? With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart." Presumption meaning being in business you have no place being. "For you have come down just to see the battle." David said, "What have I done now? It was only a question." These people always think they're just asking questions. Maybe they are. He turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. Now I want to listen to the details of what's coming, because it's going to be important. Track this. David, with the help of Yahweh, will take his sling and his stones, plant a stone in the forehead of Goliath, and kill him. So with the help of Yahweh, David will kill Goliath. He will cut off Goliath's head. The Philistines, in a panic, will run away from the Israelites back into all of their different cities. Okay? Now, a lot of people think that you can't kill a giant with a sling and a stone. Don't bet on it. Those things were like bullets. People did that. They were like bullets. They can go right through you. Right after that, we have our wedding. Details are important, so listen to the details of this. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 5. When David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. So Jonathan loved David as his own soul. So there's the twinning that's going on there, sort of. You definitely see it in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is taller, but Enkidu is broader shouldered. Okay, but otherwise they're twins. You're going to see another example of that. Remember, Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Almost a kidnapping there. Kind of important. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. There's your covenant. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing, gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword and his bow and his belt. So he takes this and he puts this on to David. David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. As a result, Saul set him over the army, and all the people, even the servants of Saul, approved. So the son-in-law of Saul, in a way. Okay, that's going to be important. Now, there is another wedding in the Bible. This time, Yahweh is marrying Israel. We're going to go back to our friend Ezekiel chapter 16. It's going to be verses 6 through 14. It's going to be page 1073. And another thing, all this stuff, as bad as we have it, as many problems as we have bonding, quite a few of us still do pretty good. When I was at a church here in Dallas, which I stopped going to because the only thing they cared about was, it's supposed to be a gay church, they only cared about the trannies and the poor little immigrants. They didn't care about gay men. Nobody cares about gay men. LGBTQ, it doesn't give a rat's ass about us. Ever see the show? There were guys there who'd been married 40, 50, 60 years. You ever watch the TV series? What's it called? The Big Bang Theory. Okay, the guy who plays Sheldon, by the time he started that show, he was already with the man who is even today his husband. If you ever watched Frasier, the actor who played Niles Frasier, already by that time, he was together with the man who to this day was his husband, is his husband. If you ever watched back in the 1970s, Welcome back, Cotter. There's Arnold Horseshack. Ooh, 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 Mr. Cotter. Ooh, 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 ooh. When he knows an answer to a question. That guy was already with his husband, and he stayed with his husband till the very end. I think he died of a heart attack in the 1980s or the 1990s. But he and his husband were still together. We've always been getting married. You just have not been acknowledging our unions. And another thing, I'm going to go on that all day. 6 through 14. We're going to do verse 7. You grew up and became tall and arrived at full womanhood. Your breasts were formed and your hair had grown, yet you were naked and bare. I passed by you again and looked on you. You were at the age of love. I spread the edge of my cloak over you. Jonathan puts his robe on David and covered your nakedness. I pledged myself to you and entered into a covenant with you, says Lord Yahweh, and you became mine. Then I bathed you with water and washed off the blood from you and anointed you with oil. I clothed you with embroidered cloth and with sandals of fine leather. I bound you in fine linen and covered you with rich fabric. I adorned you with ornaments. I put bracelets on your arms, a chain on your neck, a ring on your nose, earrings in your ears, and a beautiful crown upon your head. And I gave you my armor, and I gave you my belt, and I gave you my sword. You were adorned with gold and silver, while your clothing was of fine linen, rich fabric, and embroidered cloth. We're going to take this back to 2 Samuel. It's not on my list, so I'm going to have to look for it. Chapter 1. 2 Samuel, chapter 1. This is the song of the bow, or the hymn of the bow, when David finds out that Jonathan and his father have died. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you with crimson in luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. So we have that giving over of clothes, giving over of jewelry in wedding, or as a man would cover a woman. Or in this case, as David, as Jonathan, who is of higher status, has covered David. Now here comes the accusation that is made very explicit. 1 Samuel 20, 30 through 32. It says 33 there, but I'm going to stop at 32. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. He said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman. Do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness?" Now, we've just been claiming that David and Jonathan were lovers, and y'all just been saying no will that we're reading into this, even though for more than 100 years we know about Gilgamesh and Enkidu, that this is impossible. This just can't be true. Son of a perverse, rebellious woman, chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness. You don't think you're going to sit here and tell me that this is not a homosexual thing they're talking about? For as long as the son of Jesse lives upon the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. Then Jonathan answered his father Saul, "Why should he be put to death?" But Saul threw his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that it was the decision of his father to put David to death. Come on, give me a break. Now we need to ask ourselves a question. This woman, a perverse and rebellious woman, who is this? Now we know who this is. What we have here between David and Jonathan is a wedding. Jonathan makes a covenant with David. Yahweh makes a covenant with Israel. A covenant is an oath. For the Hittites, the goddess who presided over oaths is Ishtarah. the goddess of weddings, is Ishara. This is perverse because it's a wedding between men. And it's rebellious because the way these covenants work is they descend from heaven to the sovereign, down to his, in this case, his son, Jonathan, to nobles, down to regular people like David, who would become King David. But this one is a lateral oath between David and Jonathan that's bumping up against the king, so that it's rebellious. There are two more things that are going to be interesting. Now I'm going to really get meta, because there's such a thing as the Septuagint. It is a translation of the Bible into Greek. We thought it was the first one. It's translated on or after 290 BC, depending on the book. But Plato died about 340 BC. That's 50 years before this. So this was not the first translation. There was one running around before that. So this is running around in an era where people want to deny that David and Jonathan were homosexual lovers. How did they translate this text? Well, let's see. Because I looked this up. Now, we have in our Bible 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. Okay? The Greek Bible had 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Kings. They treat it as one big book. So we go to 1 Reigns, chapter 18. How do you think they translated 1 through 5? They didn't. It's not there. They start with verse 6. There are other things in this verse that are missing. I'll explain why in a second. And when you go to the accusation that he's a con artist, Saul says, "You son of treacherous girls," instead of treacherous girls. Where is the perverted? Where's the woman? They purposely mistranslated this because they knew that the Greeks would know that David and Jonathan were lovers. Now there's more they're missing, because if people saw that, they would know that the author of Kings, or the author of 1 Samuel, has read the Iliad. Book 17, chapter 17 and 18 of the book of Samuel are modeled on the end of book 15 and the beginning of book 16 for the Iliad. Pay attention to the details. The Greeks are running away from the Trojans in a panic. Prince Hector, with the help of Zeus, has defeated the giant Ajax in combat. He has cut off the head of his spear. And so they're going back here and they're panicking and they're losing the war. Patroclus, who is the best friend, the most beloved friend of Achilles, wants him to go fight, and he won't. But instead, what Achilles does is he gives Patroclus his armor. Okay? Now, what's going on here with the Iliad? The Iliad is really about the nous, the mind. Here's a little book from Douglas Frame, the guy who did this book, The Myth of Return in Early Greek Epic. Trying to figure out where the word nous comes from, because it doesn't sound very Greek. Well, it comes from the Greek word neomai. Neomai means to return. Return from what? Return from the land of the dead. Because there's an older mandala. The sun rises overhead, passes between the twin gates, the twin peaks of the mountains, and that's the gate into the underworld, passes under our feet and over the heads of the dead. The underworld is upside down. Comes through another twin peaks, passes over our heads again. This is another mandala. It's a return from the dead, passing through the collective unconscious. Just as our ancestors live in the underworld, they live in our collective unconscious and passing up again. King Nestor is the nous as the nous. King Nestor will tell these odd little stories about this and that, and they don't seem to have anything to do with anything. Odysseus from which we get the Odyssey, which you can be sure he's also read, is the Naos making its way through the world. Okay? Achilles is off Naos. He is without mind. Achilles is so identified with his role as a soldier that when Agamemnon, King Agamemnon, steals Briseis from him, it was his war trophy, a woman, he stops fighting for the Achaeans. He's just going to go take his stuff and go back home, what he's won so far. And he has convinced himself that he is in love with Briseis. But he is on Naos. He is without mind because he does not know that he is actually a homosexual. And he's in love with his best friend Patroclus. And this is where he has a Freudian slip. And he realizes it. And he realizes it. And he says this, and a lot of people among the Greeks and the Romans deny that he actually said that. They said that this was added because now we're past the age of heroes and homosexuals into the age of anti-homosexuality. He says this, "Oh, would to God, Father Zeus, Athena, and Lord Apollo, not one of all these Trojans could flee his death, not one. No Argive either. But we could stride from the slaughter, so we could bring Troy's hallowed crown of towers toppling down around us, you and I alone." And he has a Freudian slip. Homosexuality in gay marriage was associated with men growing up and achieving balanced mental health. Just as in the beginning, Gilgamesh is like a cosmic puppy who likes to chew on all the furniture and such, and and play with people all the time. Gilgamesh is built by the gods to be his lover. Gilgamesh is his equal, is as powerful as him, and someone that he can have sex with as long as they want, because they're both strong enough to do that. Achilles needs to understand who he is, that he is gay. This is what you call the pivot of the story. After this, he becomes a human being. The Iliad is not about the wrath of Achilles. The Iliad is about the redemption of Achilles. It ends with this way. Hector, man-killing Hector, as fated by the gods, kills Patroclus. In revenge, Achilles kills Hector. And they're about to completely destroy Troy. Hector's father has snuck in to Achilles' camp and begged him to let him have the body of his son so he can give him proper burial. Achilles gives him the body because Zeus, the king of the gods, has ordered him to do this, yes, but because he realizes it's the proper thing to do. Because he sees this old man in front of him and he just thinks of his own father. And so the story ends with the funeral of Hector. Achilles had told the Argives, give these people time to go get the wood to have their funeral fire, give them their 10 days, 2 weeks, however long it is, to bury Hector properly. And it seems like a sudden ending, but it's not a sudden ending if you understand the point. The redemption of Hector is accomplished. And now Hector can die in peace, and he will after this story is over. So that's what's going on here. And that is exactly what the author of Kings is doing. Now, if you think that I'm crazy, go read 1 Kings chapter 22 on King Ahab. Yahweh sends a lying spirit to the prophets to tell him, go and attack Ramoth-Gilead, you will be successful. You compare this whole narrative to book 2 of the Odyssey, of the Iliad, where Zeus sends a lying dream to King Agamemnon. Go and attack Troy, you will be victorious. There are all sorts of parallels. There's a prophet who's afraid to talk to King Ahab, and Achilles says, I will protect you. There's a prophet who doesn't really want to talk. There's a prophet who doesn't want to talk to King Agamemnon, and Achilles says he will protect him. There's a prophet who doesn't want to talk to King Ahab, and there's another king there from Judah, the southern kingdom, from Jerusalem, who's there to kind of cover for him. I mean, there's all these parallels. Also, we know from the archaeology, we didn't know this from just reading the Bible. We know from the archaeology that King Ahab, of all the kings of Israel, and that includes King David, of all the kings of Israel, King Ahab was most like King Agamemnon, because there was a fight that went on called at a battle called the Battle of Karkara. And King Ahab, in a coalition of kings, just like King Agamemnon is in a coalition of kings, manages to defeat the Assyrians. And they also had a very dour disposition. So those are at least two stories, and I'm sure there are others, where the author of Kings and Samuel is obviously drawing from Homer. But that one definitely shows that he was talking about them being homosexuals. Now, I'm going to end this with a discussion about why the last thing I want as a homosexual is for little boys to be molested. And the last thing I want is for little boys to be tortured and terrorized because they're gay and told that they're just fags and that they're abominations and that God hates them and that they're going to hell. This is the last thing I want. We're going to go to the Republic, section 429E through 430C. You know that dyers who want to dye wool purple, that's the royal color, very important color, first pick out from the many colors of wool the one that is naturally white. Then they carefully prepare this in various ways so that it will absorb the color as well as possible. And only at that point do they apply the purple dye. When something is dyed in this way, the color is fast. No amount of washing, whether with soap or without it, can remove it. But you also know what happens to material if it hasn't been dyed in this way, but instead is dyed purple or some other color without careful preparation. Glaucon says, it looks washed out and ridiculous. Then you should understand that as far as we could, we were doing something similar when we selected our soldiers and educated them in music and physical training. What we were contriving was nothing other than this, that because they had the proper nature and upbringing, which means they were not tortured, terrorized, or molested, they would absorb the laws in the finest possible way, just like a dye, so that their belief about what they should fear and all the rest would become so fast that even such extremely effective detergents as pleasure, pain, fear, and desire wouldn't wash it out. The pleasure is much more potent than any powder, washing soda or soap. Oh, that's true. The enemy has read Plato. They know this. They know exactly how this works. This is why we're surrounded by zombies, because they've been doing this to them their whole lives. I used to have nightmares back in the 80s and 90s about being surrounded by zombies. And then during the healthcare thing, I was like, oh my God, the nightmares have come true. These were epic nightmares. This power to preserve through everything the correct and law-inculcated belief about what is to be feared and what isn't is what I call courage, unless, of course, you say otherwise. I have nothing different to say, says Glaucon. How far was I supposed to go? Yeah, that's fine. Not going to worry about that. Man, a real live man, who's a soldier, who's musical, who's intelligent, who's got a lot of energy, who's really, really happy. That's what I want in my bed, next to me, naked, on my wedding night. And I will accept nothing less.